If everyone could just take their seats, please, and we will go ahead and get started with our next panel.
Hello, everyone. I hope you had a wonderful break. We're excited to continue with the discussions this morning. I just want to say, as everyone has been saying, how lovely it is to see a whole group of faces that aren't just in boxes this morning. It's lovely. And I'm really excited for this panel. We have a wonderful group gathered here to talk about innovation. So my name is Ellie Moss. I am the founder and principal of Moss and Mollusk Consulting, focused on the circular economy and resilience and regeneration. I have with me three panelists. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But I just want to say, as context, why are we talking about innovation in the context of resilience and sustainability in the circular economy? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. Many of the goals that the speakers before this panel have spoken about, and I'm sure we'll hear more about goals this afternoon, cannot be achieved without innovation. And innovation, by its very nature, is continually changing, evolving. What we even mean when we talk about innovation is a constantly expanding and changing concept. And so I'm really excited to speak with the three panelists today about what innovation means in their companies and for them personally, and to hear some of their wonderful stories. So I'm going to ask each of you, just to get us started, to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company, where you're coming from. And just sort of to get us started, can you tell us one or two observations about what you see that's shaping the innovation landscape today? And we'll just start right here with Britt.
Sure. Hi, I'm Britt Harder. I'm a partner with Guidehouse. We are a 15,000 person global management consulting firm. Show of hands, how many of you have ever heard of Guidehouse? Pretty good. I'm gonna tell my chief marketing officer. She's gonna be so proud, because we're only about 4.5 years old. We've been formed out of a spin out of PwC, so some people do not know us. But I'm in charge of sustainability consulting in North America. That's in the public and the private sector. We've been working in sustainability consulting for about 30 years. I've personally been doing it about 20. I like to say we did not come running back into the space when Biden got elected, but have a really deep history in the technologies, the deployments, the implementation of what's possible, whether it's energy, whether it's carbon, and whether it's working with governments or private sector organizations. And one of the big things I see when we talk about innovation, particularly in the sustainability landscape, is we already have almost everything we need to get to net zero. Yes, absolutely, we could do it better. We could have better batteries, we could have better fuels, we could have cheaper stuff, but a lot of it's already there. And a lot of the innovation we need, and a lot of the things you'll hear me talk about, are how to take those technologies and make them practical in organizations. Get them funded, get the organizations to accept them, get them deployed, get it done. And so we'll be talking more about that.
Thanks, Britt.
That's great. Thank you very much for having me here and for putting this event together. My name is Munir Alafranji. I'm the Commercial Innovation Manager and Technology Lead for the International Space Station National Laboratory. We're based right by Kennedy Space Center in Florida, so we did experience the Hurricane Ian effects. But we're all good and well now. My focus is two main things. One, to build a bridge from the laboratories, from the principal investigators, the technologists, the innovators, into space, into the ISS, into that laboratory. And the second bridge that interests me is bringing that technology back to Earth for terrestrial application, to improve life for you, for me, and for the future. So these are the main focuses that we have. Now, how many folks here have heard of the ISS National Laboratory? Wow, that's pretty impressive. Usually it's a lot less than that, hence why I'm here today. How many folks know that the ISS is looking to deorbit in 2030? Okay, so about maybe 3% of the audience. It's a resource that's beautiful, and the US owns 50% of that lab that orbits Earth 15.5 times a day. It's got some unique features to it that can really showcase the ins and outs of how a system would work in a brand new lens. And so we definitely want to utilize it. So there are definitely resources I'll be sharing with you today later on and talk about the accessibility that you guys have.
Thanks, Munir.
Deorbit makes me nervous. That's not corporate speak for crash, is it?
It's going to burn in the atmosphere.
I'm Hugh Welsh. I'm the president of DSM North America. I'm not going to ask you if you've heard of DSM before, because I'm sure that you haven't, but I promise you use our products every single day. The acronym actually stands for Dutch State Mines. We started out as a coal mining company in the Netherlands a little more than 120 years ago, and today we're the world's largest nutrition company. So a lot has happened in the last 120 years. So when I say that you use our products every day, you do. You consume our products in food, in beverages, in bars, in cereals, dietary supplements, animal protein, and there's a whole host of innovation opportunities across that entire landscape. Today, I like to think that DSM stands for Do Something Meaningful. And maybe because of that original sin as a coal mining company all those years ago, our entire strategy is focused on sustainability. So we invest, without exaggeration, billions of dollars a year in developing new products and new services to create a more sustainable planet. Now, what gets me excited about what's happening now is a lot of government action. You know, we've had the Inflation Reduction Act. I don't know how much inflation will be reduced by that act, but what I do know is that billions of dollars will be invested in things like climate-smart agriculture. And this is where the next generation of innovation will come to make the production of things like animal protein or food more sustainable. That gets me very excited. The president came out with an executive order on biomanufacturing and biotechnology a couple of weeks ago, and trying to show that the United States is going to refocus its efforts on reshoring a lot of the manufacturing processes through biotechnology. That gets me very excited. Where do the challenges lie? Well, I mean, the world is sort of crashing down upon us at the moment a little bit, you know, with the war in Ukraine, with continued zero COVID policies in China, with a lot of economic uncertainty here in the United States. And that narrows the focus of a private company a great deal. A lot of these sustainability projects, a lot of this innovation, these are long-term strategic goals of an enterprise that immediately get challenged the moment that you face any sort of economic shock or financial crisis. Put on top of that sort of a growing, for lack of a better phrase, anti-ESG sentiment that creates further challenges, particularly for a publicly traded company that's in the past heard from shareholders who said, right on, you know, keep investing in mitigating climate change, keep investing in creating more sustainable animal protein, where now you say, can we afford these things, or should we just buckle down? So it's an interesting time where on one side you have a lot of support, I think, at the moment from the US government, and at the other side you're starting to see some challenges from the market and from shareholders.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for each of those introductions. And Hugh, you've already sort of started a conversation around opportunities and challenges. And, you know, what are we seeing today? What's shaping what's possible? And what's sort of the direction that we're going to take? I'd love, Munir, to kind of go to you next on opportunities and challenges and hear a little bit about how what we can learn in space can actually help us learn better how to live on this planet. So can you just tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, what you're seeing?
Absolutely, yeah. So the International Space Station is a pretty awesome laboratory, right? There are three main things I'd like to talk to the audience about. The first one, I think most people are familiar with, the microgravity environment. The second, you strip away the vector of gravity from whatever system that has an input and an output, whatever you're working on. You start to look at the system in a more fundamental method. It's almost like using a brand new lens, looking at the system where it's been quieted down from the volume of gravity, if you may. And so would that allow us to understand how to make the system a little bit more efficient? All these little forces that have always been in existence that we've neglected here on Earth, you can now measure very accurately because gravity's gone. Now, if you reintegrate the understanding of the system, of your research, back by introducing the vector of gravity back to the terrestrial application, would you build a more efficient system? Potentially, right? So microgravity has profound effects on many different things that we use every day, many different systems that we use every day, and so we cannot forget that. Very difficult to do here on Earth, right? Another thing that the ISS has that is difficult to do here is, from a material science point of view, is the harsh environment, the extreme environment. Hands down, the harshest environment known to humans. Okay, you experience plus to negative 200 degrees multiple times a day. Well, what does that do to material? You've got natural gamma radiation coming from all over the solar system and beyond. What does that do to material? So a quick example is the MISSE platform, which is external to the ISS. And material scientists love this because they can apply their different materials to see how that can withstand time and the harsh environment. Can that help us build tires for our cars, everybody drives, that can last 6 months longer, a year longer? And so that's a question that we can ask. And pushing the material beyond what we understand of it can help us understand, from a material science point of view, how to improve and become more efficient. And the third example I'd like to talk about is the vantage point. The ISS has a very unique orbit around Earth, and we get to see 90% of our globe. Okay? So that's a pretty cool vantage point. We could get to see our planet. And one thing that you'll see 95% of astronauts describe our planet is they use the term fragile. Time and again, time and again. It's huge, it's massive, it's been there for a very long time, but it's still fragile. And so having eyes in the sky at 400 kilometers in orbit can really get us to understand the changes that are happening from a macro lens, from a macro level to our planet.
Awesome. That's really exciting. And I love the way you've described what's possible and sort of how the perspective from space and what's possible in space can really inform what we're doing to stay alive here on Earth. Britt, coming back to you for just a little bit about opportunities, challenges. You know, as a consulting firm, I imagine you interact with a lot of different companies doing a lot of different types of things. So what are you observing sort of across the board on innovation and what companies are experiencing and how Guidehouse helps them with innovation specifically?
Sure, thank you. So I think when we think about opportunities, when we think about challenges, when we think about innovation, you know, everybody wants to be innovative. Nobody's boss says, don't innovate, be staid, be boring. And so there's a lot of different contexts for innovation. There are innovations that no one has ever done before, brand new technologies. And that's, I think, really where Munir comes in. You know, who is pushing the envelope? How is the government sort of seeding that kind of new ideas? And then there are innovations that maybe someone has done before, but you've never done before. And that's organizational innovation, financial innovation, these kind of opportunities to make things easier for companies. Because Hugh really, highlighted this. We're talking opportunities and challenges, particularly in the net zero world and the sustainability world. The opportunity is that there's a lot more attention here than there's ever been before. I've been doing this 20 years. Lots of companies are talking about this, not just a few B2C ones that have to maintain a really leading edge brand. Everybody's talking about it because their investors are calling them and the SEC is circling. And so they're saying, we got to get on this. So this is a big opportunity to transform lots and lots of organizations and for them to put themselves in resilient, strong positions going forward. The flip side of that, the challenge is, one, these organizations don't have a lot of practice with this. We have looming financial challenges that can cause organizational shutdown. And all of these needs are still beyond compliance. This is still something that some organizations feel they can back away from. The SEC rules aren't official. The investor requirements are getting stronger, but you can often navigate them with a well-crafted statement and a light policy. And so trying to find that middle way to make the organization prepared for the future, but in a way that is business savvy and appropriate for today, for their culture, for their needs, for their footprint, for the existing technologies, are really the sort of balance of that opportunity and challenge that we see.
Fantastic. And I think that's a really good point around what's driving innovation. Mm-hmm. Companies need that push sometimes, or they need the permission, to go in a particular direction so that their shareholders don't say, wait a minute, like this, why is this a priority? Shouldn't we just be doing something else? So that makes a lot of sense. I know that each of you have a lot of really wonderful stories and examples from the work that you've done. So I wanted to give you sort of a little mini TED opportunity here to say, could you each give us like your 3-minute TED talk on just your favorite example or, a recent example of innovation? I love stories. I think storytelling is one of the best communication forms that we as humans, we can take a lot away from stories. So tell us a story, and I guess, Hugh, would you like to get us started on sort of a storytelling break here before we go to lunch?
Sure. I'll give you 2 quick ones. The first one starts in space, because I have to make the connection, because it's so cool what the International Space Station is doing and all that. 30 years ago, there were a couple of scientists at Martin Marietta that were tasked with the responsibility of trying to find a way to grow food on a spaceship that was designed for interplanetary travel, so a mission to Mars. And what they did is they found some microbes under a rock in a river in Oregon, little genetic modification, and they could grow an algae that would produce an oil that you could consume. Now, that project never went anywhere and the funding went away, but those scientists started their own company, which became Martech Biosciences, which DSM acquired about 10 years ago. And Martech Biosciences today makes things through algal fermentation. So we make a lot of DHA, EPA, omega-3 that you'll find in dietary supplements or in things like infant formula. But the interesting story has to do, we went from space to the sea. So in Blair, Nebraska today, there's a meeting going on at a new fermentation plant there that makes an algal oil that you use to feed farm-raised salmon. Now, why is that a problem? Well, to raise salmon today through aquaculture, you have to feed them fish oil or fish meal that you catch from the sea. And that is prohibitively expensive, but you're also continuing to deplete marine resources. It's not a sustainable practice, doesn't make a lot of sense. And we know we're going to have to grow aquaculture by 50% over the course of the next 20 years to feed the population. If you feed those salmon the oil made at this plant in Blair, Nebraska, it eliminates the equivalent of all the wild-caught fish in the Mediterranean Ocean every year, just from one plant. So it's a big deal. And that technology started through a NASA-funded research and development program. My other story, and I apologize for not bringing in any props today. I'm kind of famous for coming to these events and bringing like a pile of elephant dung or a surfboard or a carpet or something. I was going to bring a small cow because I wanted you to all experience firsthand what it's like to be in a confined space with methane in the air. And that small cow will fill this space very quickly with that methane. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the climate impact of burping cows. You know, we see that in the news. Well, at DSM, we've invented a new feed ingredient that can reduce enteric methane emissions in ruminants, so cows and sheep, by up to 90%. That is a tremendous innovation. Now, the challenge for us today is when you have an innovation like that and there's no market for it, what do you do? And I think, we work with different organizations similar to Guidehouse to say, hey, we need to have some sort of methane trading market. We need in the agriculture sector something beyond manure digesters. And I think through the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the other legislation that's recently passed, we'll find our way there soon. So that's 3 minutes. Space, cows, salmon, Guidehouse.
Amazing.
That's brilliant.
Thank you, Hugh. That was
good.
fabulous. Munir, would you like to tell us a story?
Absolutely. I've got 3 stories, but just to kind of piggyback on something that you said, the space-based R&D may have not resulted in what was initially intended, but it opened up doors and opened up a new thought and new data that, who knows where that will end in time.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you how impactful it is. There's 88 million people in the United States today that have nutritional lipids in their brain. I know it sounds crazy. Don't be off-put by it. Because of that space program, because this algal DHA EPA is in all the infant formula that's produced in the United States. And it started with a few guys working on a space-based research project 30 years ago.
Gosh, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for showing, thank you for bringing this and sharing this story with the audience. And so this is a great example. I've got a few more examples that I could share. In regards to sustainability, I think it would just be fitting. I'll talk about 3 companies. Some of them are in the audience today that sponsored a sustainability challenge along with us and partnered with the International Space Station National Laboratory. And the first one is Estee Lauder, a cosmetic company that I think everybody here knows of, launched a Beyond Plastics challenge. The issue is, we use a lot of plastics. And so the main 3 points in regards to why work on this challenge in space was, 1, to see if they can reduce the use of virgin plastics. I mean, it really hurts to think about the virgin plastics that are being, the efforts in there when we have so much plastic that's just piling up, right? And so how do we reduce that? And secondly, how do we, reduce the petrochemical livestocks as part of the pathway towards creating plastics. And so looking for efficiency in the production is very important. And Estee's been a pretty awesome partner. We've awarded 2 laboratories to be sending their work to space, so we're very excited about that. We also have the Target Corporation Challenge that, in partnership with us, called Cotton Sustainability. I want you to picture this. I want you to picture a kilogram of cotton in front of you, and then I want you to picture 1,000 liters of water in front of you, which is about 265-ish gallons of water. Because that's what it takes to get that kilogram of cotton. So cotton is a water hog, and we really need to figure out ways to reduce that water that it's being consumed. So the Cotton Sustainability Challenge was pretty successful. We had 3 people that were awarded through our NLRAs, our National Laboratory Research Announcements. We've got some that are active today, to send their work to space, to look at the genetics of the cotton seeds, look at maybe building a hybrid seed that could be more resilient to extreme conditions. So when you start applying all these stressors to a system, maybe a seed in this situation, right? How does the root system behave in microgravity? Well, it changes from plant to plant. Some plants are more resilient to that. Well, why is that? All these plants have, for thousands of years, grown in the same gravity on the same Earth. Why are some plants a little bit more resilient? Well, we don't know that. And so what does that mean? What if you reduce the water and nutrients that you're providing the plants? Can they survive? At what point is the breaking point? And can we push that beyond? And again, I want you to keep in mind that everything that I'm talking about here always is going to come back to terrestrial application. How is this going to benefit humanity here? So we're very proud to be partnering with these groups. Another one is Procter & Gamble, also in the audience today, is sending Tide in space, sending Tide chemicals to space, part of the solution there, to see if they can fix the problem that the astronauts go through. There's no washing machine in space. So astronauts wear their clothes for about 3 days before they jettison it out and it burns into the atmosphere. Not very sustainable, but the astronaut population is very small. So how is that really impacting Earth? So what Procter & Gamble is looking at is, can they create a solution where you don't need to use hot water to wash your clothes and you'll have the exact same outcome as if you did? That can save, that could really make an impact on the carbon footprint, can it not? And so that's something that space-based R&D is helping Procter & Gamble do. And then lastly, real quick, Merck, the pharmaceutical company that I think everybody's familiar with, built the drug Keytruda and did some research on board the ISS. Keytruda is used to help with breast cancer and skin cancer and increase the efficiency, the efficacy and the absorption rate of the drug by doing space-based R&D. So you remove the vector of gravity, you've got all these other stressors, you can start to understand how chemicals interact with each other. And you can then start to improve on that. So we do have real success stories. We do have partners. We're looking for more partners. We're launching the Sustainability Challenge for FY23. So if you're interested in learning more about how to get in on that, do say hello to me after the talk.
Thank you, Munir. Those are wonderful examples, and I just love the space theme we've got going here. Britt, I don't know if you have a space example or not. Even if you don't, we'd love to hear your stories. Thank you.
I'm not going to do space, but I am going to do Estee Lauder. So, we are connecting here. So one of the things that when we talk about stories, when we talk about particularly net zero, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Scope 1 is the fuel you burn on site. Scope 2 is the electricity you consume. Scope 3 is the emissions from all of the stuff that you purchase or is upstream and downstream of you. Basics of carbon accounting. Scope 1, can be decarbonized. Renewable thermals, electrifying stuff, buying renewable energy. Definitely can be done. It can be expensive. We can finance it. You can do, some very interesting stuff. It can be done. Scope 2, pretty easy. Virtual power purchase agreement, one stroke of the pen, your electricity is decarbonized. Scope 3, usually 80% of the emissions of your average company. Very hard to decarbonize. Imagine in the food and beverage supply chain, you're looking at, if you are a hamburger company, if you are a drink company, then you're looking at the agricultural impacts of the sugar, the oranges, the plastic. This is where we start to get into some of the DSM stuff. And so one of the things that we've done, and one of the challenges that we've seen, is if you've been doing this for about 20 years, about 16 years ago, companies started getting interested in Scope 3. Walmart was first, congratulations to them, and they called their suppliers and they sent them a form and said, what are your emissions and what are you doing to reduce it? And that got everybody nervous because Walmart's very powerful. But then everyone wanted to do that. And everyone sent their own form. And it got to be a lot of forms. And somebody's job was just to fill out the forms, and no one had time to make any change. And the suppliers got exhausted, and the supply chains stayed static. And so one of the ways that we've been able to break through that is by bringing all of those companies together. We founded what's called the Supplier Leadership on Climate Transition, or SLOCT. It's essentially a club of the largest food and beverage companies in the world. They all come together. Coke, Pepsi, McDonald's, Estee Lauder, Restaurant Brands International, Nestle, many, many of them. And you can Google it. I'm allowed to say all their names in public. And they've all agreed to come together and bring all of their suppliers into one program so that they can have a common ask and a common education. It's not just another demand, another request. We're going to bring you together. We're going to innovate together. We're going to move each of these companies in the supply chain forward, whether it's carbon footprinting, whether it's abatement planning, whether it's the actual purchase and innovation of specific technologies and working groups, whether it's ultimately financing that transition for them. How can we work together to influence the supply chain? And when we all get together, we're big enough, we're powerful enough, and it's one ask, we can really make change, as opposed to that sort of static and fragmented challenge we had before. And so that's been a program that, one, we're very proud of, and two, is really recognized, whether it's FMI, whether it's Ceres, they say, hey, this thing's making a difference. And so that's something that we're very proud of.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for Story Hour. I appreciated that. I want to remind people we can take your questions. So if you want to go to slido.com and put in the code, I'll be able to see your questions here and I can filter them over to the panelists. One question that has come in here is around risk and innovation. And I think everyone has highlighted a lot of success stories from innovation, which is appropriate for a panel like this. But I'd love to hear a little bit about how to manage the risk in innovation. And particularly, this question asks both about legal risk as well as financial risk, and whose budget ends up bearing the brunt of the failures of innovation. So I don't know if each of you can speak a little bit to, I think risk and failure are inherent in the innovation process, but how, from an organizational structure or a project structure perspective, how does that actually get managed into the process? So I don't know, Britt, if you want to start us off this time?
Sure. Risk, big question. And risk means a lot of different things. And so I want to talk about a few concepts of risk that will be relevant. The first, obviously, if we're not talking about it, is climate risk, what the changing climate is going to do to your organization. And if organizations aren't thinking about that, they need to, in part because the SEC and investors are mandating it. The second is integrating these concepts, sustainability concepts, into the core enterprise risk management of an organization. Traditionally, and I'll use an example here, sustainability kind of got to live over on its own. And they had their own reports, and they talked to their own stakeholders, and they, and then sort of I'll call them for a flippancy, the big boys, the real financial reporters talked to the 10K. That was a whole different organization. But now we're seeing sustainability topics, climate topics become so valuable, so important, and so regulated that they need to cross over and work in the core enterprise risk management function of the organization. And the organizations that are doing that are thinking further ahead, are putting those climate, those net zero topics in their right forms and making sure that they're actually being able to drive them and change them. From an innovation perspective, absolutely. Anytime you take a new concept, you want to make sure you're making a good judgment on it. And you want to make sure it's something that your organization needs to do. And that's when you heard me talk about innovations that no one's ever done before and innovations that maybe just you haven't done before. For a lot of organizations, those are the kinds of innovations you want. We know how virtual power purchase agreement behaves. We can model the cost of electricity. We know what IRA is doing to the price that developers are putting together. You can make that leap with confidence. Whereas if what you're trying to do is create a new material to, as I said, create a new kind of battery, create a cost-efficient mobile transportation fuel that's net zero. Yeah, that's a risk reward. That's an R&D approach that you need to be managing appropriately from a cost and risk perspective. But for a lot of these, you can manage the risk because there are lots and lots of analogs. We're moving these concepts from a few leaders down to all of the organizations in the world.
Thanks, Britt. I know the concept of risk in space is a little different. I mentioned to you when we were preparing for this panel that several years ago, quite a few years ago, I was present for a Falcon 9 launch, which did not succeed in getting into space. It was a firework as opposed to a new chapter. So risk has a whole other level of seriousness, perhaps, when we're talking about space. So how do you guys think about that in the context of the space station and the research?
Yeah, I'd love to tell everybody that every experiment that goes to the ISS is successful and awesome science comes out of it, but that wouldn't be true. There are failed experiments because the principal investigator did not think about a certain obstacle in space. But guess what? There's data, and that data helps build a better experiment, and then you move forward through iteration, and you build a great experiment. And then you do what Keytruda can do today, and you build something that can help humanity. Because we understand that space is hard, we've built a process to help maximize mission success and the rates associated with that. So we've got our NLRAs, our opportunities, which you could find on our website, issnationallab.org. A lot of resources are available to you, so they're there. But you'll see our opportunities are active right now. There's one that I manage. It's called the Technology Development Opportunity. And all are welcome. All U.S. companies and U.S. principal investigators are welcome to submit a concept summary. It's a 2-page concept summary. You're basically explaining to us what kind of research you want to do. Why do you require the ISS as a lab? Why can't you walk down the street to another lab and conduct your experiment there? And how is this going to help humanity? Where's the commercialization planning that is associated with that? Who's going to be the user? Who's going to be the buyer, et cetera? So what that does, and then there's the second step. It's an invite only. You're invited to the second step, and you submit a full-fledged proposal, which is a little bit more traditional. But this 2-step process allows us to give you guys feedback. If you submit a proposal and we see something that you're going to be using it's just going to hurt the astronauts, for example, it's going to contaminate another experiment, we're going to give you feedback and say, hey, these are the things that you should consider, or here are some advice. You can take that back, go back to the drawing board, and resubmit your proposal. And so by doing that, and these are just the first 2 steps, we later on introduce you to implementation partners. I think a lot of you would be familiar with it. It's a group of companies that will turn your experiment to make it space ready. So you'll see many steps that kind of start to reduce the risk of failure and increase the success rate. But even with that, there are no guarantees that your experiment is successful. I'm an aerospace engineer by education, and I actually went to GW, got my graduate degree there. So I lived in DC for the majority of my life, and I got my hands dirty. I built prototypes, and yeah, some of them, did not pan out, and thousands of dollars just, and I'm like, why didn't I think of this? It was so simple. But what that has done is it activated and educated me about how to build a better system, and how to learn from issues that have nothing to do with, let's say, coding, a coding issue, and me finding a way to bypass a coding hurdle to something completely not related to coding, something that's maybe a person-to-person conflict that I'm trying to resolve. And so failure sometimes is the best teacher, and I'll stop there.
Thank you. Hugh.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question from a private company perspective. I mean, I didn't say jokingly that DSM stands for do something meaningful. I mean, we have a purpose-driven company beyond the cliche. I mean, 23,000 people, super fired up, want to change the world, want to create new innovation, new science to help mitigate malnutrition and climate change and sustainability. And they're highly motivated. I think yesterday Fortune came out with this company's changing the world. A couple of years ago, number 1 was JP Morgan, number 3 was Apple, number 2 was DSM. So we have people who are just completely fired up to do things. But then we looked and we said, why are we having issues with scaling up innovation? Why are we having issues with bringing stuff to market? And we took a hard look at what was going on, and we had over 600 different projects ongoing in the company. And what that led to was dilution, right? Dilution of focus, dilution of resources. And we had to take a big step back and say, what are the projects that we know we can scale because they're close to the businesses we have today, that the market wants, that regulators and governments will support, and that we have the wherewithal to do. And after we looked at those 600 projects, it came down to 10. And some of them are the ones, like I mentioned, like Veramaris or Bovaer. That's how we began to look at de-risking innovation in the company, by doing away with the so-called hobby shops, by trying to find a way to channel all of that passion and all of that energy into an area where it wasn't just a super cool new technology, but it was something that would have impact and we could scale. That was incredibly difficult to do, because you have folks who are so engaged and so passionate that, of course, their project is the project that's going to change the world. And trying to get them to let go and put that passion somewhere else was a big challenge. But it's been successful thus far.
I think that is a nice segue to another question before we wrap up, which is around innovation mindset. So as you work with teams, as you work with companies, as you work with whatever group of people is needing to innovate, how do you cultivate that innovation mindset, and how do you create a set of either real or hypothetical constraints to challenge people's thinking, to drive that innovation, sort of get that creative leap that's needed? What does that look like in each context in which you each work? I think it's a really important thing to be thinking about. Munir, do you want to start this time?
Yeah, sure. I mean, going back to plastics, if I'm not a material scientist, so I know I made a new friend here, so please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But let's say we're building tires, right? And we're thinking, how do we make this more efficient? Let's say your tire is going to be 50 pounds, and there's 7 pounds of excess material. That's just waste. That's either going to burn in the atmosphere or just going to be discarded, right? Can space-based R&D help reduce that 7% or 7 pounds to 1 pound or 0 pounds? And so these are the kind of concepts we're looking to support. Obviously, the process is a lot more complex. But looking at a diverse way to bring this knowledge to the ISS, I think, is very important. So when you pose a problem to a group, let's say we're all scientists here, and I'd say to you, we're trying to, let's go back to the previous example with Tide. We're trying to clean our clothes, but we want to use less water by 5%. Let's use the space-based environment. There's no washing machine. Real estate is very difficult to find. Power consumption is difficult. You have to go through an entire process to use every watt, right? So these are the hurdles. And, you want to do it efficiently because it's confined. So you want to make sure the clothes are clean. So now we start thinking out of the box. In fact, forget the box. There's no box thinking. Start with crazy and let's start putting some math and science to it and figure out what we can do. Well, any innovation that we figure out that could be helpful in space and with those parameters, and you've been stripped away from the luxury that we see today, well, can they benefit us? Can we start doing this? And so space-based R&D is really important when it comes to our everyday life, as we've discussed before. So sometimes looking at a problem and making it a little bit more difficult to yourself will force you to innovate.
Love that. Hugh, thoughts on innovation mindset and how you get teams kind of over that mental hump to
it starts
real thinking?
with the culture of your enterprise, and I think people use the word culture a lot, but don't really, they don't really think through what it actually means. And I can tell you, it starts with the type of people that you want to recruit for your company. It's not always the smartest people. We look for people who are insatiably curious, right? Insatiably curious. They want to find new solutions to problems. They want to find new applications for existing solutions. But being insatiably curious is not enough. You also have to be collaborative. Now, collaborative doesn't mean I get along with everybody, and we like a little healthy tension, right? A little healthy friction, because out of that healthy friction, ideas are born. But you have to be collaborative, right? It can't be competitive. So we're looking for folks who are collaborative, not competitive, want to win, but want to win as a team, are insatiably curious. And if you can sort of get that magic mix in your culture, then you just stand back and let it happen. And the job of people like me who have absolutely no skills whatsoever is to just bring some discipline to the process, figure out where the right places are to invest, and then let the people who are super smart be super smart and bring these things to the market.
Fabulous. Britt, I'm going to go to you next, and just someone would like you to repeat the name of the food and beverage group working on the alignment of sustainability surveys, if you don't mind going back to that real quick.
So it's called the Supplier Leadership on Climate Transition, or the SLOCT, SLOCT. Supplier Leadership on Climate Transition.
Have you thought about working in radio?
No, but my 5-year-old daughter is learning to spell. And so we use this tempo a lot. All right, so I will talk about innovation mindset. I am mindful that the next thing is lunch. I used to be a school teacher, and you never keep the kids late for lunch. So I'll be quick. We've worked in a lot of, and I've led a lot of innovation processes where you come with an organization and they are trying to solve a new challenge, or they want to be more innovative, or they want to put an innovation into their culture and to solve a big problem. And it's a mix. You obviously need a structured innovation process. You can't just go having big ideas and hoping they work. I mean, you're looking, you're identifying, you're costing them, you're narrowing them down, you're prototyping, you're working through the process. But the second piece is you need a culture where that is valued. And it's easy to say, we value innovation, but that means that when people look around, that they see that the people who had an idea, who took a risk, who got into a program that maybe didn't work out, were still raised up in their jobs. We're still seen as high potential. We're moved forward so that it wasn't seen that if I go out on a limb and it gets cut off, I'm dead. It's I'm doing what the organization wants and I'm supported in that. And that you have to do that every day. You can't just say it once, because that's what makes people within an organization believe, and that's what helps them make their innovation mindset real. And there are ways that you can build those structures. There are ways that you can execute change management to help your organization support that innovation mindset. But it really is about, it's about creating real trust in individuals every day.
Thank you. And so I want to thank you all. I'm going to give you a chance to say sort of closing words, but I just want to say again how much I appreciate all the perspectives that you each brought. I feel like we've gone from the high level space all the way to the very practical level of what does this look like on a day-to-day basis inside of a company, inside of an organization. So I really appreciate all the different perspectives that you all brought. To close us out, and I know we're ready to go to lunch very shortly, I just would love to hear from each of you one last piece of either advice or a specific opportunity you'd like to point people towards, as everyone in this room is continuing their own journey with innovation, thinking about what this can mean for them in their career, within their organization. Just advice, opportunities, closing, inspiration. Hugh, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember standing in this building a few years ago, and I see Mark in the back. He'll remember as well, at a conference full of CSR people where I explained that CSR is dead. That corporate social responsibility is over, your careers are done, thank you, have a good night. And I'm happy to say that I was right? Because CSR has evolved from something that was in a sustainability group that was on the periphery of the business, that was there to help with reputational management and PR, maybe a little employee engagement and recruiting, to being something now that's core to the enterprise, to successful enterprises. Right? It fits into all of our strategic thinking. If you engage with a McKinsey or a Guidehouse, they're going to walk you through why this matters. This is the prism through which you should look at everything, from where you're going to invest in new businesses to what innovation R&D projects you're going to do. I'm thrilled that we are all back together and we could spend some more time together. What I would recommend is, buckle up, because it's going to get a little rough. The next 6 months to 24 months, they're going to get rough. We're going to be challenged in our thinking. There's a whole cohort of people who are ready to say, I told you so, that we should have invested way more in oil and gas exploration, and we should have done all these other things. Hold your ground, stand firm. This is the right thing to do. There are short-term solutions to near-term problems that don't mean we can't continue to work on the long-term solutions that the planet and the people on this planet need. So I would say stay resilient.
Wow, hard to follow on that one. Well, just the two things I want to just reiterate, and one is that we're gearing up for the FY23 Sustainability Challenge. So if you're interested in being a sponsor and sponsoring all size businesses, to innovate, definitely say hello to us. And then secondly, we do have active research opportunities for researchers. So if you're working with a research team and they were not aware of this, please do make a connection there. We're happy to talk to everybody and try to push the innovation envelope forward.
And I would say, don't be scared. There's always someone to look to talk to, who has perspective, who's done this. Even if you're the great market leader, if you dominate the search engine market per se, there is someone who can share with you the perspective on the challenge you had. If you're new to sustainability, there's lots and lots and lots of good data and examples to take the risk out for you, to allow your organization to move forward in a successful way. And even in the public sector, there's lots to learn from the private sector, lots that's been done, lots that's been established that can take the risk out and allow you to be successful, even in potentially a choppy or changing environment.
Thank you so much, Hugh, Munir, and Britt. I've really enjoyed speaking with you, and I think you've shared some wonderful insights for the group. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you.